Okay, so that's exactly how it played out, or at least how I thought it was going to play out. Notre Dame was going to win. Notre Dame was going to win comfortably against Georgia. And part of that is, yes, this is not the same Georgia team that we have become accustomed to over the past few seasons, that perennial national title contender. This is more than just going from Carson Beck to Gunnar Stockton. Georgia had some other systematic issues that I would have liked more in a Penn State versus Georgia matchup than a Penn State versus Notre Dame. But Penn State, is probably just happy to be in the Orange Bowl. It doesn't matter who they were going to face. But now, actually talking about this, I mean, Notre Dame is a top five defense. Objectively, statistically, they have star power. Even though they are without some of their better players going into this, or one interior defensive lineman, that superstar player for them, but Notre Dame still looked and had the exact feel of a top five defense against Georgia. And I know that Georgia has its offensive struggles, but that's still an SEC team. And going from Carson Beck to Gunnar Stockton, there is a drop off. Don't get me wrong, because Beck would have been a 2-year starter, right? It's supposed to be an NFL quarterback. The jury is out on how good Gunnar Stockton is, because I know that's going to be the concern, is how much credit is Notre Dame due against a Georgia team. Honestly, the same thing could be said about Penn State and Boise State, and the same thing is being said, and I don't look at it that way. Just because other people are saying it doesn't mean that I agree with it. I think that Notre Dame had a hard-fought victory, but they rely on great defense, elite defense, a ground game that involves quarterback Riley Leonard and somebody who is a cerebral player that has seen a lot of college football in that same player in Leonard. So this is a team that does not make mistakes. You cannot trick them. They are disciplined. Other teams, hey, you can run it. SMU, for example, Kevin Jennings is a first-year starter. Tom Allen had his way because it is easy to draw up schemes that will confuse Jennings in the SMU offense. But for Notre Dame, you don't get that same luxury. You're going to have to do different things to try to throw off Riley Leonard. And unfortunately for Penn State, why I think this is a winnable matchup is because this is a lot of strength on strength. Penn State, quality, cerebral quarterback. I won't necessarily say that Drew Aller is the dual threat to the capability of Riley Leonard, but Drew Aller can run. Riley Leonard can run. Both of these guys are not easily, you can't just run a defensive scheme and hope to trick them. You really have to bring your A game defensively when it comes to your game plan. And then they have an amazing backfield. I mean, Notre Dame's backfield is comparable, right? The best teams of the best teams do not make it this far without the backfield that they have. Am I going to sit here and say that Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen are behind Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price and Aeneas Williams? But it's the fact that Notre Dame does have more running backs that they can turn to. Jeremiah Love goes down in that Sugar Bowl game against Georgia, and there's not too much of a drop off there to Jadarian Price. And then the fact that they trust a third running back in Aeneas Williams, that's something that Penn State is missing. They had Cam Wallace. Cam Wallace suffered an injury, but fortunately for Penn State, you see how much running back depth matters. Because for Notre Dame, it is the Jeremiah Love show next to Riley Leonard. Whereas it's a 1-2 punch for Penn State with Singleton and Allen, but there's clearly a pecking order in the backfield for Notre Dame. But those are still any of those guys could start. If Jeremiah Love was not in the picture, they could go with Jadarian Price. If Jadarian Price was not in the picture, they could go with Aeneas Williams. So it's the fact that they have depth and they have quality depth, and then you have to take into account, okay, Jeremiah Love most likely will get the football, but here's Riley Leonard who can keep it. I mean, he's the second leading rusher on this team. And he also has before going into this game, these are statistics prior to the Sugar Bowl, but Leonard has seven fewer carries than their number one running back, and one fewer touchdown as well. 16 rushing touchdowns to 15 rushing touchdowns for Jeremiah Love to Riley Leonard. Like I said, Riley Leonard does not make a lot of mistakes. Smart quarterback. A bunch of different wide receivers to throw to, but I have a hard time saying, hey, is Notre Dame's wide receiver room better or is it Penn State's? But if we're talking overall pass catchers, then it is Penn State's. Tyler Warren, Trey Wallace, saw some good play out of Amari Evans in that game against Boise State. I do like what Notre Dame has. This is why we are at the Final Four. There are not many things that I can pick out and say this is a flaw or this is a problem with Notre Dame. It's either going to be a strength or it's going to be something that's not as strong, if you will, right? There's really no weak links at this point. It's just which one is not the strongest. And if I look at Notre Dame's pass catchers, that is the case. That's not the strongest link on this team, but they don't need it to be because of Leonard's dual threat ability, because of a three-man backfield for Notre Dame, because of good coordinators on both sides. We haven't even gotten to the fact that there is the Penn State connection here with Al Golden as the defensive coordinator. This one is going to be somewhat personal for him in the Orange Bowl. But when I look at these receivers, Jordan Faison is the first player that I think you need to know about. Mitchell Evans, the tight end for Notre Dame as well. He's healthy and he's just a talented player. The statistics aren't going to show it, but it's someone that Penn State is going to have to account for. He is an athletic mismatch. And at 6'5", 260 pounds in Mitchell Evans, that's going to be a tall task for whomever is going to cover him. If that is Dom DeLuca, if that is Tony Rojas, if that is Kobe King, because Evans doesn't win his matchups with speed, because I think Tony Rojas is going to be much more athletic than him in a speed race, but it's that size, it's that ability to box out defenders and use your size to maximize your ability in pass catching situations. So Notre Dame is a team that likes to play disciplined football. This isn't an air raid team. This isn't a big play team. They like to sustain drives, control the football, and rely on that top five defense. So when I look at this Orange Bowl, don't look at it as, well, Penn State and Notre Dame are going to get into a shootout. Could they? Certainly they could, but I think this is going to be a defensive struggle all the way because of the way that Notre Dame operates and because all the marbles are on the line. For Penn State and Notre Dame, rarely do you see these types of games at any level, NFL, high school, college football, with what we're talking about. When two teams get to this point in a winner-take-all situation, you will not see teams take these active risks. And Penn State is going to want explosive plays, but they're going to be a little more selective. And with the way that Notre Dame operates, where they just get, a little bit of chunk plays, little chunk plays, and control the pace of the game, control time of possession. Notre Dame likes to have the same set of goals that Penn State does. Control time of possession, win the turnover battle, win the explosive play battles. It might not be outlined like that, but Marcus Freeman and James Franklin operate from a similar type of blueprint here. So for Penn State, this is a winnable matchup because Notre Dame is not overly dominant in the passing game. Penn State's kryptonite is a team built like Ohio State where they have multiple different receiving options to go to. And I know Oregon got knocked out the way they did in the Rose Bowl, but that's still a team that that Penn State does not match up well with. Penn State matches up well with Notre Dame because it's a lot of strength on strength. This is an even matchup, and I think the initial spread for Penn State versus Notre Dame per our friends over at FanDuel was 1 point. Notre Dame was a 1 point favorite. There we go. It's updated. So we'll talk about it more in the ad read here. But Penn State is a 1.5 point underdog at the open here against the Fighting Irish. This is going to be a close game. It's going to be a physical game. Notre Dame certainly got beat up in that Georgia game. So did Penn State against Boise State. We're going to talk about Abdul Carter. We're going to get your questions and comments. But I like this matchup a lot. I'm not saying that I wouldn't have been invested in Penn State versus Georgia, but there is certainly a lot more to like about Penn State versus Notre Dame than it would have been hypothetically with Penn State versus Georgia. I think at the end of the day, a win is all that matters. And Notre Dame poses a tougher challenge than what Georgia. And that's why I said on a recent live stream that I'm confident Notre Dame wins and I'm confident they win convincingly. Does Georgia have a chance? Absolutely. But there are a lot of good things about Notre Dame that got them there. Do not let that Northern Illinois game define this Fighting Irish team. This was always going to be a team that was going to get better down the stretch. They didn't let the loss to the MAC team define them. It was fun to use as a bludgeon, as a reason as to why they couldn't be ranked above Penn State. But I never looked at that Notre Dame team aside from that and said, you know what, this is a legitimate college football playoff contender and somebody that could end up in the semifinal